Hi guys, welcome back to my channel, Allie's Book Nook. If you're new here, my name is Allison, and today I'm going to be discussing with you the 6 books that I read in the month of July. So let's dive in. I almost finished a 7th book, by the way, a Ronald Malfi book that I'm quite enjoying, but I have like less than 100 pages left in that. So the first book I read it on my Kindle, so I don't have a physical copy here, but it's called Gray After Dark by Noelle W. Eiley. And she's the same author of Ask for Andrea and a few other books. That's the only other book of hers that I've read. But I read this on my Kindle ebook and also listened to it through Libby on audio. So this is a thriller. It was published in 2025. Is that right? That's what I have written down. I don't know. I don't think that's right because I'm pretty sure I downloaded it on my Kindle last year, 2024. So anyway, it was 370 pages or 9 hours on audio, and I had gotten it free on my Kindle when I did, I had a free 3-month trial. And I also listened to it free through Libby, as I said. So I started it on 7/1 and actually finished it on 7/2. This was a really good book. This was my favorite book of the month. So the story follows this girl that it's actually based on a true story. So the author listened to a podcast about, sorry, got some stuff falling over here. Listened to a podcast about a true story in my home state in Montana in the 1980s where a jogger was kidnapped by some backwoods father and son. And in that story, in real life, it was about 24 hours. She was rescued. There was a casualty of someone that she worked with, I think, trying to rescue her. She worked at, if I'm getting the facts right, like a camp, but she was, what do you call it, a biathlete. And so they do kind of a sport I hadn't heard of, cross-country skiing and shooting, like shotgun or whatever. And so she listened to that podcast and she was inspired to write this story. So it's loosely based on true events, which I have heard that several of her books are. So I didn't know that. That's pretty cool. But anyway, in this fictional story, Gray After Dark, our character is also a biathlete, and she's working at summer resort in Idaho and in the wilderness. And she got that job because she can train by running on the trails in her downtime. So one day she's out for a run and she is kidnapped, and she's kidnapped by a backwoods father and son duo. And this book had me on the edge of my seat. It was not 24 hours. The story takes place over a longer period of time for her kidnapping. And I always try to have these reviews be spoiler free, so I don't want to say what happens, but man, this book was so intense. It was like I stayed up reading it. I couldn't put it down. And it was really easy to follow with the short chapters. I like when they're short chapters because you're always like, okay, I can do one more. And it was really great. It takes place in I think it's called the Fred Church Wilderness in Idaho, which is, in real life, it's the largest national forest in the lower 48, the continental U.S., excluding Alaska. So I've read one of her other books that also partially takes place in Idaho, and she is from Idaho, this author. But man, this book was so, so good. Definitely want to read more of her books. So in my notes, I wrote that it starts out strong. It's easy to read, has short chapters. And the kidnapping does take place in a real forest in Idaho. I liked the Idaho setting. The title, I think the title comes from, there's a quote in the book that someone says, "Even stray cats look gray after dark." And I think that's where the title comes from. So that kidnapping that I was talking about in real life, that happened in 1984 to a gal named Carrie Swenson in Montana, outside of Big Sky, Montana, which is near Bozeman. So that's a pretty interesting story. You can look that up on Wikipedia. I think they also made like a Lifetime movie about it. And I remember hearing about that as a kid growing up in the 90s, because it was somewhat local to me and always creeped me out. So this book does a great job with the creepy factor. So anyway, I said this was so good. I love this book. I would recommend. And in the audio, there's 2 narrators. There's her, and then there's another person. And so I liked that they had 2 different narrators for the different genders. And the tension curve, I said, was high, especially towards the end. My additional notes on this, again, this is the author of Ask for Andrea. And this, dare I say, was one of my top reads for 2025. That's why I got it read in pretty much 24 hours. 48 hours, whatever. Really good. No, I had it on my notes here, read it in 24 hours. And I do want to read her whole catalog. She has a new book recently that came out called, I think it's called Quiet Girls. It's got a picture of a bus on the front, and that's also based on a true story. So I want to read that. That is in my Libby holds. And my local library recently added more of her books to our Libby catalog. So yay for that. So a rating, I gave this 5 stars across the board. 5 stars for character, plot story, readability, and overall rating. This book was awesome. And I had it on my Kindle, but if I ever saw a paper copy, I would probably pick it up just to add to my library because it was on point. Same with Ask for Andrea. I don't have a hard copy of that either, but I would like to eventually. Okay, so the next book that I read is called Home is Where the Bodies Are by Geneva Rose. This was my first Geneva Rose book. I read this in paperback, and I also listened to it through audio through Libby. So it was a huge wait list on Libby, but my library acquired more copies, so I got bumped way up on the list. This was published by Blackstone Publishing. It's a thriller, and it was published in 2024. 278 pages, and it's only 8 hours on audio. Side note on that, I usually listen to my audiobooks at 1.7, anywhere from 1.5 to 1.7 speed. So that it might have been a little bit longer had you listened to it at 1.0 speed. So my price on this, the back cover says $18.99 US. I got this at Barnes & Noble when they have the books out there where it's, I think it's buy 2 get 1 free or buy 3 get 1 free. So I don't know how that comes out, but I got a little bit of a discount, but Barnes & Noble is a little bit pricier. And it's rare that I buy new books, but I'm glad that I did get this one. And then, of course, it was free to listen to on Libby. Look at the cover. Isn't that so cool? It's an old VHS tape that's cracked with some blood on it. So cool. So I started this on July 3rd, and I finished it on July 4th. Another quick read with short chapters. So in this story, this gal, her mom dies. So her dad has been out of the picture for a little while, and she's her caretaker for her mom who dies. I think she has cancer. And then her 2 somewhat estranged siblings come back, and they're, all 3 of them are there to settle up the estate and family affairs and whatnot and take care of the funeral arrangements, all that stuff. And they're watching home videos because their mom used to record home videos like back in the 90s and when they were kids, and they come across a video that has a apparent crime on it. How do they describe it on the back? On screen, their father appears covered in blood. What follows is a dead body and a pact between their parents to get rid of it before the video abruptly ends. So now they must decide whether to leave the past in the past or uncover the dark secret that the mother took to the grave. So, yeah. That was a really fun premise. I enjoyed this book. It was good. What are my notes on here? Short chapters, easy to read. It had 3 narrators in the audio, which I liked. And one of them was January Lavoie. She's like my favorite audiobook narrator. I love everything she narrates that I've listened to, I should say. And so that was pretty cool. I did guess the ending somewhat early on. Not the full ending, but I guessed part of it. But I still thought it was really enjoyable. I definitely want to read more of her books. I have a paper copy of The Perfect Marriage, and the audio is on hold with my Libby. Then after that, I'll have to read The Perfect Divorce. But yeah, I also saw that Geneva Rose recently had her baby, which I feel like I see stuff on Facebook. I feel like she was pregnant. It felt like a really long time. I'm sure it did for her too. I think she published 3 books while she was pregnant, I think. And I think this was one of them. But, and You Shouldn't Have Come Here, and maybe The Perfect Divorce. Anyway, so congratulations to her. I said the tension curve was good. One thing I noted was there was overdone aphorisms by all the characters. So basically they would always be saying these like words of wisdom. They would all have these little like nuggets like, oh, well, I don't know. I can't think of any offhand, but you would say like, you know, like, oh, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree or something like that. And for all of them to like be saying that and stuff all the time, I thought that was a little bit overdone. That was one thing that I didn't really like, but the actual story was pretty entertaining. So I really like the physical cover of this, and I like this is corny, but I like the feel of the pages. They feel like kind of slick. So I really liked that in the physical copy. And this actually took place in her hometown. So in the back of this, which I think this one is a Barnes & Noble exclusive, and this might be the exclusive content, it has pictures of her going back to her hometown where this story takes place, which is a very small, I think it's like a township. And so that's kind of cool that it took place there, and we got a little bit of information on that. So I gave this overall a 4.75. Characters a 4.5. Plot, story 4.5. Readability 4.75. And overall rating 4.75. Was this like a life-changing book? No, but it was just really fun and enjoyable at the time. And look, it says rated T for thrilling. So that was good. The next book I read is Final Girls by Riley Sager. So I read this in paperback and listened to it in audio. This is published by Dutton. It's a thriller book, and it was published in July 2017. This was his first book under his pen name that he published. It's 329 pages or 12 hours on audio. So I paid $8.50 for this at my local book used bookstore. And then it was free to listen to with Libby. I started it on 7.5 and I finished it on 7.9. So this was probably my least favorite Riley Sager book. But like I said, it's his first one published under his pen name. So he published other books before that weren't very successful. Then he rebranded himself under the pseudonym Riley Sager. And he's been really successful. And I think he does like a book every year. So I do feel like his writing has improved since this book, but it wasn't bad. It was still entertaining. So this book is about, she's called a final girl. So a final girl is kind of like a term used for a survivor of like a mass killing. Multiple people were killed in an event, and this person's a survivor. Which I think there's another book by a different author. I can't think of who it is. Is it Grady Hendrix, Final Girl Support Group? I haven't read that either, but anyway, I digress. So in this book, our main character, what is her name? Quincy Carpenter. 10 years ago, she went on a vacation with 5 friends and came back alone. So they went to vacation at like a cabin, and all of them were killed except for her. So now she has kind of an online following as this final girl. And there's another final girl from a different unrelated crime who she lost 9 sorority sisters to a college dropout's knife. And anyway, their lives intersect, these 2 final girls. And let's see here. It says, now Quincy is doing well, maybe even great, thanks to her Xanax prescription. She has a caring, almost fiance, therapeutic presence in the police officer who saved her life all those years ago. That is until Lisa, and then there's a third final girl named Lisa. Well, Lisa is found dead in her bathtub, and it looks like an apparent suicide, may or may not be. And so now there, new details about Lisa's death come to light. Quincy's life becomes a race against time as she tries to unravel Sam's truth from her lies and remember what really happened at Pine Cottage before what started 10 years ago is finished. So that's the other thing. When she was a survivor, because of how traumatic it was, she blocked a lot of that out. She doesn't really remember the details of that massacre. So anyway, this was not my favorite read of the month. It wasn't my favorite Riley Sager book, but it was still entertaining enough. So let me tell you my notes I had on it. I said probably what I've already said. Not bad, but not my favorite Riley Sager book so far. So my favorite one I've read so far of his is it called The Last One? The Only One, The Last One Left? Do I have it up here? The Only One Left. That's my favorite Riley Sager book that I've read. And then Middle of the Night was my second. I've read 4. The other one I read was The Last Time I Lied. Anyway, I feel like his writing has improved since here, as well as the pacing and the tension. The pacing and the tension curve was just a little too slow for me in this for a Riley Sager book. And I also guessed the main part of the ending, but not all of it. It did have a good plot twist at the end, but not as twisty as some of his others. And some of his others are almost too twisty at the end that I've read, especially The Last One Left. It's like 70% of the book is like a certain pace, and then the last 30% twist, 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 where it's almost a little bit overdone. I still really enjoyed that, but this one is not that. It's just a little bit slower paced. So I gave this a 3.5 stars overall. 3 for characters, 3.5 for plot story, 3.5 for readability, and again, 3.5 overall. So far we have mostly thrillers here. Out of the 6 books I read, I only have 1 that isn't a thriller. So our next one is another thriller, and maybe a domestic thriller, I guess. This is The Mother-in-Law. And this is by Sally Hepworth. I read this on hardcover and audiobook. And this is published by St. Martin's Press. I would call it a domestic thriller, a slow burn domestic thriller. Published in 2019. 340 pages or 9 hours on audio. I got this for $2.99 at Goodwill because it's a hardback. And then free through my Audio Libby. I started it on 7/10 and I finished it on 7/12. Part of this I was on a short little road trip for. And so that's why I got through it so fast. Also, I don't know if I noted this, but the audio was family friendly on the road trip. So it wasn't anything that really I felt like I couldn't have on with my kids in the car. I was listening to it. So it takes place in Australia. And the narrator is Australian. And I was listening to it at 1.7. And my husband's like, what are you doing? This is crazy. How are you listening to this? And at this speed. And so, yeah, that was kind of funny. He's like, you're psychotic. Anyway, so the plot to this story is this lady's mother-in-law dies, and at first they think it's a suicide, but later the cops start to question it and think that maybe there was foul play involved. And so you have the daughter-in-law, her husband, and his sister and her husband, like all the kids and their spouses, are potentially involved in the death of the mother-in-law, who the mother-in-law is very, she's very well-to-do, classy lady. And we're trying to figure out what really happened. So it has alternating timelines between the present and then going back 10 years ago when this gal first married into the family. Lucy, that's her name. And so this mother-in-law, Diane, she comes off really cold at times. And I really actually, I enjoyed this story. It reminded me, let me just read you my notes here and then I'll tell you, because I might have already said it in here. I said it was good overall. The pacing was a little slow. I liked the female main character and their relationships. They were likable. They were non-toxic relationships. And in that sense, it reminded me a lot of her other book that I read, which is The Younger Wife, or like the relationships of the female characters in Big Little Lies, which is written by Leanne Morley, another Australian author. But I liked that. I thought this book would be very like, toxic relationships in the family and the mother-in-law and the daughter-in-law. They actually did have a relationship on some level, and it wasn't like I thought it would be. And I kind of liked that. I kind of get sick of sometimes in thrillers when none of the characters are likable or have any redeeming qualities, and I didn't get that from this. So that was kind of refreshing. Let's see here. I did like the Australian narrator. I liked her. I liked the setting. I liked some of the verbiage they use, like calling candy lollies, stuff like that. Pants, trousers. That's always fun for me. A good Australian or British book. So, yeah, this is the second Sally Hepworth book that I've read behind The Younger Wife. I think I like The Younger Wife a little more, but I will read more of her books. Some of them have really pretty covers. So I do want to read Darling Girls. That's one that I've seen a lot of buzz about, like probably in the last year, and I want to read that one. So I think this book was recommended a long time ago by Maggie. So Maggie, if you're watching, thank you. I finally got around to reading this and I did like it. So thanks for the recommendation. I gave this 3.5 stars overall, but I'd probably bump that up to 3.75. So the characters, I gave a 4-star. I like the characters a lot more than I thought I would. The plot story, 3.5. Readability, 3.5. And again, overall, 3.5. Possibly 3.75 in retrospect. Okay, so my 5th book out of 6 for the month was the only book that I read that was not a thriller. And this is a science fiction book / hard science fiction book called The Dark Forest. And I'm not sure how you say the author's name, Sin Liu, translated by Joel Martin. So this is a sequel to a book that I read and talked about in June called The 3-Body Problem. Turns out there's 4 books, I think, in that series, 3 or 4. It says in here, The Remembrance of Earth's Past trilogy. But I think there's a 4th one now, not sure. But the 3rd, so it's The 3-Body Problem, The Dark Forest, and Death's End. And they have made The 3-Body Problem into a Netflix series. I don't know if it follows the whole book series, but I might go and watch that now because I don't know that I'm going to continue in this whole series. Anyway, so The Dark Forest, sequel to A 3-Body Problem. I read this in paperback. I tried to do audio, but that was a struggle for me. I actually got a 3-month trial of Audible. Every once in a while, I'll go in and do a 3-month trial of Audible, and you get 3 months for 99 cents a month, and then I'll cancel it. And I usually use that to get books that aren't available on my Libby, which this was one of them. And I had a hard time with it because for me to, at speed 1.0, it was very slow. At speed 1.7, I struggle because this is a book that for me, I really had to concentrate on. And so I absorbed a lot more of it through physically reading it than listening to it. So this is categorized. And so I only listened to maybe an hour or 2 at the most. And it is 23 hours on audio and 518 pages. It's a bit of a chunk. This is categorized as hard science fiction, and it was published in 2008. So, this is not my copy. This is my neighbor's copy. She let me borrow the first book, and then she let me borrow this book, and so it was free. And then it was 99 cents through the Audible trial. And now that I'm used to Libby, I actually like the layout and the features and stuff in Libby more than I like Audibles. So I started this on 7/14 and I finished it on 7/27. It took me a couple weeks, and like I said, it was because I mostly just read the actual physical copy. So this continues where the first book left off, which in the first book, Earth makes contact with an alien civilization, and we find out that their planet is inhabitable because there's 3 suns, and so it's just really like they call it chaotic eras and stuff like that. Anyway, they need another place to go, so they are going to basically invade Earth, or they're gonna come settle on Earth. But because of how far away they are, it's going to take them like 400 years. And so this book takes place anywhere from like after we made contact up through, I think, 200 years into the future. And so I didn't like the sections in here. That's another thing that made it hard to read, is it didn't have like really short chapters or anything. The first section was a couple hundred pages, and that is also why I didn't listen to it in tandem with audio. It was too hard to try to find my place on my audio going back and forth with the book. But the first section was pretty big. The middle section was not. And then part 3 was, again, just one big section, like several hundred pages. The first part 1 and part 2 were kind of slow, kind of drawn out. Part 3, then it got really good. Because that's when we're more in the future, like 200 years in the future. And some of the people, I don't want to give too much away, but some of the people from present have hibernated. And so they're come out of hibernation like 200 years in the future. And we get to see what Earth looks like 200 years in the future. And that was really cool to me. I really enjoyed that part. That was like my favorite part of the book. But let's see here. What are my notes on here? The long sections, I didn't really like that. The first book had just a bunch of short chapters, so I liked that. This layout, I didn't like very much. Slower pacing, but then it did get better in part 3, but then it slowed down a little bit more towards the end again. It wasn't as good as the first book. It was still pretty heavy on the science. And in this one, I didn't feel as much connection to the characters that I did in the first book. So, yeah, I don't know if I'm going to continue with this series. This was translated so the first and third book have the same translator. The second book does not. This was translated by someone else, Joel Matheson. And what are my ratings? I gave this a 2.75 overall. So my lowest rating of the month. 2.5 for characters, 3 for plot, 2.75 for readability, and 2.75 overall. Just because, well, for one, like I said, I don't like the way that it was broken up. And also, it was just like really hard science. Not all of it, but some of it was. I would say more so than the first book. And I mentioned this in my last video, but my neighbor who let me borrow this, she's a really cool person, but she's a literal scientist, so she's very smart. And some of this I think was over my head. So yeah, but it was still enjoyable. I did not dislike it. This was my most challenging book of the month and of the recent past. And sometimes we need that. Can't read popcorn fluff all the time. You have to have something that challenges you, whether it's like challenges your morals, the way you think about things, or just challenges like your reading level. I'm a fast reader. And so for me to like force myself to slow down and get through this book took me a couple of weeks, that was a good thing. So yeah, that is my thoughts on The Dark Forest. Okay, the last book that I finished in July is called The Last Invitation by Darby Kane. And I really liked this book. This is another thriller. We're back to the thrillers. I have this in paperback, but I actually only ended up listening to it in audio because it was so fast paced. And also I got this book at Goodwill for $2, and it kind of smells like, it does smell like smoke. Yeah. So whoever had this was a smoker, and that was slightly unappealing to me. So this is published by William Morrow and HarperCollins. It's a thriller, and it was published in 2022. I think she has at this time she had 3 books out, and this is my second one of hers that I've read. 402 pages or 10 hours on audio, but with me listening at 1.7, it was about 9 hours on audio. And that was free through Audible. And then, like I said, I got it at Goodwill. Flew through this pretty quick. I started it on 7/25 and I finished it on 7/27. So, I really liked the premise of this book. So, this is about, there's an exclusive kind of secret club of people that it's basically a vigilante group, and they give out what they consider justice to people that get away with stuff that they shouldn't. There's a quote at the beginning of this book, and it says something like, let's see if I can find it. Most people say they want justice, but they really don't really want justice. They want revenge. They want to see the pain and suffering spread around equally. And so, yeah, that is a great opening line for this book. So, let's see here. There is this group of, like I said, I already told you that. Let me read you part of the back here. They meet the second Tuesday of every month and vote, and then someone dies. Over the last few years, prominent people have died in the series of fluke accidents and shocking suicides. There's no apparent connection, no signs of foul play, but it is all a powerful group of women, the Sophie Foundation, who meet over wine and cheese to review files of men who behave very, very badly and then met out justice. Jessie Hall jumps at the mysterious exclusive invitation to join this secret club. The invite comes when she's at her lowest, blah, 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 ready for a chance to make the bad guys lose. She soon realizes, though, just how far she's willing to go and how dangerous this game has become. Once in the group, it's impossible to get out. She has nowhere to turn except for her former friend Gabby Fielding, who is investigating the mysterious death of her ex-husband. Aligned in their goal to take down the Foundation, Gabby and Jessa need each other, but working together doesn't mean that they trust each other or that either will survive to tell the truth. This was so fun. And so Darby Kane, she used to be a trial attorney, and she's written a few books. Her debut novel was Pretty Little Wife, and I read that. Did I read that last year or earlier this year? I read that book somewhat recently, and I really liked that one too. That was a really cool premise about this lady that she thinks she kills her husband, but then the body isn't where she left it, and what's really going on. That was a good one. I would recommend that. But anyway, this was really fun. I definitely want to read more of her books. So this one also had really short chapters, which again, I love. I feel that helps you get through a book quicker. And I just really enjoy the premise, and I would totally recommend this book. What one did I like better, this one or Pretty Little Wife? I don't know. They're both pretty good in their own ways. But I just really enjoyed this one. And I would recommend both of them. So I give this a 4.5 stars overall. 4 for character, 4.5 for plot story. 4.5 for readability, and overall 4.5. So that was just a really enjoyable read. So those are all the books that I finished in July. 6 books. Like I said, I almost finished a 7th, but I didn't quite make it. So that'll be in my August reading wrap up. I'm really enjoying Ronald Malfi, and I'm going to be reading more of his books this month. But for now, those are the books that I got through. So let me know your thoughts on these. If you've read any of them, how you felt about them, if you plan on reading any of these, any of them sound interesting or sound not so interesting. I'm also going to be doing a video of all the books that I have acquired during the month of July, which is a little bit less than the last couple months, but there's still a good chunk there. So watch for that video shortly. If you like this type of content, please consider subscribing to my channel, giving this video a thumbs up, and I just look forward to continuing this conversation in the comments, and I will talk to you guys later. Bye, guys.